I reported on our show a week ago, they at least inquired on Trey Hendrickson.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, number one, that's still something that could come to fruition? Or do you feel like with Cincinnati right now, they're just not seriously entertaining trades for their all-pro pass rusher?
They are, but they want significant compensation back.
No better time to check in with our NFL insider, of course, of NFL Network. Check him out with the insiders. It's Mike Garafolo. And Mike, it's been busy with the Cardinals. It was a little bit of a slow burn over the last couple of days. Let's start with Monday. Milton Williams initially looked like the target. You know, New England kind of went over the top, it appears, with everybody else. They pivot to Josh Sweat. What can you tell us about maybe those first 2 to 3 hours of free agency?
Yeah, they were definitely in on Milton Williams. Now, look, when we talked last time, I said that, Milton Williams, they've got other guys that can play that spot. So if they got him, it was great, but it wasn't like a necessity. It wasn't like we are going to bid and no matter what the price winds up getting to, like, this is going to be our guy. I've seen that plenty of times in free agency. I didn't get the sense on this one. I felt like they had a number that they were willing to get up to. And if you compare it to some of the other deals, New England went to a level that some of these other teams weren't willing to go to. The Cowboys with Osa Odigizua at $20 million, and then he comes in at 24. Milton does. Odigizua would have gotten there if he had hit the free agent market. Decided not to do that. Wanted to be back with the Cowboys. So, this was a deal where the Cardinals were like, well, this is just outrageous right now. We're bailing. And then you've got that money. And now you can reallocate it, right? Then you can direct it more towards Josh Sweat. If they sign Milton Williams, do they sign Josh Sweat too? Probably not, right? There's only so much money that you can allocate for, positions, even if they're not, if it's defensive end, defensive tackle, it's still defensive line. So that was plan B for them, and they were able to get that done. And you got the history of Jonathan Gannon with Josh Sweat, and they feel like he's going to be a big piece of the puzzle here. He did have a knee thing that I think some teams were a little concerned about, but the Cardinals felt good about it, and Gannon feels good about it, and now he's a Cardinal.
How competitive was Sweat's market? Because the Cardinals seemingly pivoted on a dime, got that done like 45 minutes later. Were there a number of teams that would have been interested? Do you feel like if the Cardinals hadn't signed Sweat, he gets another deal before the end of Monday?
Yeah, I mean, he probably would have gotten something elsewhere, but not for as much money. I mean, the fact that they were able to pivot and get that, and I say pivot, I mean, they were in it all the time, the entire way, but then it was like, okay, missing out on Williams, let's get Sweat now, a guy that we feel good about. So they were in it, and this is how it works. I mean, I've had a bunch of agents, talk to me about, team told me that they were in on my guy, and then all of a sudden they weren't. And a lot of times teams will be honest and say, hey, we've got something else we're working on. If this doesn't work out, then we're going to hit the gas on this one. I don't know what the communication was on this one, but I know that Sweat felt good about it. They felt good about it. The Cardinals did. And again, once the Milton Williams thing did not happen, then it was full throttle to get Sweat done, and they did.
Mike, we know on this show, the Cardinals have been making calls on pass rushers since last trade deadline. They called on some big ticket names. I reported on our show a week ago, they at least inquired on Trey Hendrickson.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, number one, that's still something that could come to fruition? Or do you feel like with Cincinnati right now, they're just not seriously entertaining trades for their all-pro pass rusher?
They are, but they want significant compensation back, and it's tough. It's tough to give up as much as you're going to have to give up for Trey Hendrickson plus the compensation. Like if you did that, whether it's Myles Garrett or Max Crosby, or Micah Parsons, yes. I don't feel the same way about Trey Hendrickson, and the fact that it hasn't been done shows you that. It's like we're going to have to pay top dollar plus top compensation for that as well. So you're starting to hear a little bit more about how Hendrickson wants to be in Cincinnati, and Cincinnati wants to make it work. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, this could pivot back the other way. But Hendrickson's going to fully flesh out all possibilities here before he decides what he wants to do with regard to maybe taking the best deal he could possibly get in Cincinnati instead of trying to find something else where I just feel like that's the hard part of this whole thing, is giving up both for a guy who is really good, but you're talking about like top level talent in those other guys that I mentioned. Hendrickson's more of a production, hardworking type of guy who's going to get to the passer and get things done for you. These other guys are being talked about as like specimens, right? That's when you give up everything you possibly can for a guy.
Let's talk about the guard market. The Cardinals were reportedly one of the final three teams for Will Fries, who got a pretty, it's free agency. Things are going crazy. Will Fries gets a 5-year contract, and that's a big deal. You told us on our show last week, like the eventual contract that Will Fries was going to sign would blow people away. Like, having said that, do you feel like there's an avenue for the Cardinals then to pivot to maybe a Mekhi Becton, or is that like a circumstance where Will Fries top guy on the market after Trey Smith, like everybody's going to go after him?
Will Fries, I mean, listen, the only guy that got, I think this still stands, the only guy that got a 5-year deal in free agency was Will Fries. Yeah. Everybody else was 3 or 4 years, which is weird because usually you have a bunch of 5-year deals in there, and that shows the willingness for teams to go after him on this one. The Cardinals were in the mix. Again, that was another one that came in. It's such a big number where it's like you're going to be in there to a certain point, and then that's just too rich. Why are we spending this much on one player? So when you say pivot to Mekhi Becton's market's not nearly what I thought it was going to be. I don't think what he thought it was going to be either, because he did really play well. Problem is there is a lot of, and he came into the NFL with question marks from when he was drafted. And now these question marks have sort of built up. And it's like 1 year didn't wash all that away. And a lot of people are looking at that saying, well, in the right place, with the right coach and the right scheme, Jeff Stoutland and everything that the Eagles offensive line coach was able to do, we can't replicate that here. So he's better off going back there. But the Eagles, in the meantime, are trading for Kenyon Green, who's going to be a bit of a reclamation project himself. So you could pivot to a guy on that level. I think they're certainly nosing around and seeing what's available. But as far as top level guards, they've mostly all been signed. I mean, I'm looking at my free agent sheets right now. Becton's up there. Tevin Jenkins, there's been questions about him as well. Brandon Scherf, has he retired yet? I heard he was going to retire. And then, listen, one of the other guys is Will Hernandez, who's coming off the ACL, who otherwise probably would have signed an extension with the Cardinals and been locked in there. Has had talks about other teams. There is interest in him. I know that. But I know some teams are saying, well, we're going to wait a little bit, and some seem to be more willing to do something in the near future. So I don't put the Cardinals in that latter portion. I think maybe if he's still available in a couple of months and he's fully healthy, that's a different deal. But then in the meantime, one team might wind up signing him. So we'll see.
Let's talk about the wide receiver crop right now. Devontae Adams, of course, goes to the LA Rams. Cooper Kupp release. Doesn't feel like the Cardinals are going to be in on Cooper Kupp, but I want to talk Cardinals specific here with you, Mike. They've got Marvin Harrison Jr. They've got Michael Wilson, 2 young players on the outside. Underneath has kind of been a question mark for them. They re-sign Zay Jones to a contract, I think up to $4 million on a 1-year deal. Greg Dortch is tendered. Do you feel like there's an avenue to add another veteran? Because, this is an offense, fair or not, that whether it's Drew Petzing, Kyler Murray, et cetera, it has not emphasized wide receiver play. Like Marvin Harrison Jr., I think, Mike, has the only 2 100-yard receiving games that Drew Petzing has produced as an offensive coordinator. Yeah. So do you think it's about fit? Do you think it's about the availability of guys? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a bunch of guys that are going to wind up taking VSB, what they call the veteran salary benefit, which is basically a minimum contract that only counts so much against the cap, but it gives a guy a little bit more money than what that counts. And I think a lot of these guys are reluctant to sign that because they saw themselves as $2, $3, $4 million guys, and they're not quite getting there. So I think they'll probably nose around that section of the market as guys become more willing to sign those deals. I have not heard them mention with Cooper Kupp. I've heard the Seahawks mentioned, so he could wind up in the NFC West elsewhere other than the Rams, but I have not heard the Cardinals in that market. Doesn't seem, they spent a lot of money, so it doesn't seem like they have a lot of money to do this kind of stuff right now. But if you're asking me if they're going to sign a veteran at some point before we get into OTAs or even training camp, yeah, I think that they probably will. It's a question of at what level are they fishing, and I think it's more along the value portion of the market.
You mentioned spending money. They spent money late last night jumping on Dalvin Tomlinson.
Yeah, that's big money.
Cut by the Browns. What's your assessment of that whole thing? Because here's the fan base's reaction is we didn't get Milton Williams and kind of laid low for a little bit. The Browns then basically had to cut Dalvin Tomlinson, because they gave, Myles Garrett $40 million. Yeah. And so the Cardinals kind of went over the top on this nose tackle. Walk us through your assessment of how that deal got done.
Yeah, it's good value. I say it's good value. It's big money, but it's good value. Dalvin Tomlinson we probably don't give enough love to for what he means and for what he's been over the course of his career. I mean, I still to this point don't know why the Giants didn't resign. I mean, Giants drafted him and then didn't wind up re-signing him, but he's been a productive guy. He's been a reliable guy. Let me look at the number of games played. I know he's talked about as, 16. I mean, he had 1 year, 22, where he played 13. Every other year played 16 games. So he is a reliable guy, an available guy. I know he's on the backside. He's on 31 or 32 at this point, but defensive tackles can play into their mid-30s, especially a guy like him who takes such great care of his body and understands so much about the game. So I don't know. Is there a connection? Is there somebody who coached him before? I'm trying to think of possible connections there.
The Cardinals have their fingerprints with Cleveland. They have multiple assistant coaches that have come from Cleveland. They have strength and conditioning people. So definitely a connection there. Historically with Gannon and Drew Petzing.
I just know that the proof is in the pudding with Tomlinson's deals that he has done over the course of his career, whether it was the one with Minnesota, and he's done like short ones, like 2-year deals, and he keeps cashing in. So give him all the credit for that, because that's a good way to earn things as you go along there, rather than one big deal and then you come off of that and people kind of look at you a little bit differently. He's been productive, and the fact that they committed what they did shows you that they agree with what I've heard plenty about Dalvin Tomlinson, that he's got good football left, especially because he's been so reliable.
Kazir White unsigned. The Cardinals basically made it known to him because he put out basically a social media post, Mike, 4 to 6 weeks ago saying goodbye. So I don't know if Arizona straight up told him he wasn't coming back or he'd be allowed to test the market. Mm-hmm. It is funny. He's been one of the more productive linebackers in the NFL. A lot of these guys got signed. Nick Bolton, Sunday, Monday, Greenlaw. And the Cardinals are going out kind of doing mid-tier moves at linebacker. Is there an avenue for Kazir White to return in the right circumstance?
Yeah, I mean, it's may wind up being one of these things where you think your market is what it is and you have a hard time accepting that, and it takes you a while to get to that point. So I think he's probably one of those guys, and I know that Gannon likes him and has experience with him, and that's why he's in Arizona, or he was in Arizona. You say goodbye because they tell you, like, look, we're not, you've got an idea. That's not where we are. Go ahead. Good luck on the market. Go test it. So when he said goodbye to that regard, it's probably along the lines of that. But if he comes back at a different number, all of a sudden, are they more amenable to making that happen? Perhaps. But he seems like the kind of guy who is having trouble kind of getting to a number that he thought in his head. We'll see where it goes with him.
Let's keep it on the defensive side. Like we had heard the Cardinals are going to add a veteran cornerback. Have you heard anything as it relates to some good value signings that could happen at the cornerback position? Asante Samuel, Rasul Douglas, is there a reason why, as opposed to a lot of these other positions, Mike cornerback has kind of been the one? Maybe there's some good value here later in the week. Yeah, there is. And there's veteran guys to be had out there, depending on where you want them to play. I mean, Mike Hilton, more of an inside guy. Rasul Douglas has never quite, he had that 1 year where he really, I think he just picked off a bunch of passes, was in Green Bay, all of a sudden was thought highly in the free agent market and did do a decent deal that year. Not great, if I recall correctly, and then has had trouble kind of duplicating that. The Asante Samuel one is interesting to me. I had thought that he was going to be making some visits to teams, and I don't know if that's been reported. I think he's going to have to go that route. He's going to have to go visit with teams and meet them old school free agency face to face and get a deal done that way. There's Avonte Maddox, I believe, is still out there. That's another guy that has experience with Gannon there. Mm-hmm. So perhaps you could wind up hearing that he's going to pop up there in Arizona at some point. So we're out of phase one. We're on our way out of phase one of free agency, where all of a sudden it's like, and every year it's all of a sudden it's like the offers drop off. And so it's almost like accepted that, okay, now we're out of that kind of funny money portion and dropping off. So I think that's where we're going to get to as we get into next week with a lot of these guys. You mentioned last time you were on with us, they were going to not aggressively look at a quarterback, but you wouldn't be surprised if they brought in a veteran, and they did so. Jacoby Brissett on a 2-year deal. Why is that the right move for this team? Why is that the right move, putting in a quarterback room with Kyler Murray, in your opinion? Yeah, I mean, that's a guy that I trust to go in there and play and win games if you need him. Now, I wouldn't be my long-term solution, which is why he's signing as a backup and not a starter. But he is one of the top 5 backups that you could have, I think. Jameis Winston to me is in that bracket as well.
I think they were in on Jimmy Garoppolo at one point, the possibility of him winding up in Arizona. Like at least they talked to him, but Garoppolo wanted to stay put in Los Angeles. May have even had some other opportunities. He maybe even had some other opportunities elsewhere to potentially compete for a starting job, but decided that he wanted to stay with the Rams there. So yeah, I mean that's why I'm not surprised that they want a guy who, if Kyler Murray's nowhere near being benched. But if it gets to a point where the play drops off and they have to make a decision, maybe a hard decision, you may be hearing some calls for Jacoby Brissett, and maybe that pressure might wind up being good for Kyler Murray. I know that they want him to take that next step back up to it being a top performer next year. Who knows? Who knows what the arrival of Jacoby Brissett, a guy who has been a starter for at least stretches of time in his career, will do for him.
Yeah, 2-year contract too, I thought was interesting where like he's going to be around. Maybe Kyler Murray doesn't work out this year. Maybe he's a bridge to a rookie. Maybe he's a bridge to somebody else, or maybe Kyler Murray, elevates, which is what they hope for.
I think they definitely wanted to, you didn't sign him just to send a message, right? But that's part of it. It's like, we've now got a guy who has started before. If we have to go that route, and we're way early on that. I don't want to make anybody think like all of a sudden we're way early on that, but we may be having a different conversation come October, November. We shall see.
You got to win games late in the season. You can't go 2-5 down the stretch.
And if he gets hurt, you got a guy, again, if you need him to start 2-3 games while he's hurt, you feel good about that.
Absolutely. Certainly upgrade over Clayton Tune. We asked you last time, the Skattebo noise is quieted now during free agency. And of course, he's going to ramp up here. ASU's Pro Day right around the corner. We hope he runs well. Any news on Skattebo, if that was a top 30 visit or was it officially a top 30 visit? I clarified that. It was a top 30 visit. I believe it already happened too as well. It was not just a local, because the local visits usually happen. You have a local day and you guys that come in, and they didn't want him to be part of that. It was more of a, hey, we really feel good about this guy. We want to have a top 30 visit, which is a much different, more in-depth visit that you have with a guy. So that was a top 30 visit for Cam Skattebo, who's got a bunch of them coming up. There's going to be a lot of interest in Skattebo because he really performed well at the combine. You know what the tape says. So a lot of teams want to go in depth with Cam. Lastly, before we get you out of here, any news on a potential Trey McBride extension? The Cardinals still have some money left over. That wouldn't necessarily hit this offseason, but any maneuvering with the Cardinals, like current crop of not free agents, but existing players to get extended like a Trey McBride? That's budgeted. That's absolutely budgeted. I have not heard that it's imminent, but that is something that they're going to continue to work on through the offseason. A lot of times you'll get that stuff as you get into OTAs, mini camp, or maybe before the start of training camp. That's probably the timeline that I would put on that one. All right, last question that I promise I'll get you out of here. Landscape of the NFC West now. San Francisco looks like they're not tearing it down, but clearly they're in transition. Seattle basically looks like, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, like they won games with their defense last year, so they're going to try to upgrade. And then the LA Rams are clearly going for it with Devontae Adams. Like, how do you see the shakeout happening in this division? Yeah, I mean, the Rams were the team that was closest to beating the Eagles in the postseason, brought guys back, added with Devontae Adams. I think they feel really good about where they are in an ascending team, considering how much youth they have, particularly on the defensive front, which is a huge part of building things in this league and continuing to be successful. The Niners one is interesting because they still have a lot of talent on that team. There's no question. Can these guys stay healthy, right? Can Christian McCaffrey stay healthy? Can Trent Williams stay healthy and stay on the field? It's still going to be competitive at the top. And I give the Cardinals, like, this has got to be the point at which you've got to announce your presence in the division. This is year 3 for Jonathan Gannon. They're starting to get more talent. We'll see what comes out of the draft, but you're going to have to rely on those guys to contribute as well. This roster should feel like we're talented enough to get to the point where we can make noise in this division. Can they compete with that? I put LA and San Francisco on that top tier. Can they announce themselves and be part of that tier? I think they have to be this year to feel good about where things are going. And I think they feel that way internally as well. We've got top tier coverage. Our guy, Mike Garafolo, NFL Network. Check him out on Twitter. And of course, the Insiders podcast. Thank you so much, Mike. Looking forward to talking with you later in the offseason. Absolutely. You got it.